Hello everyone, my name is Kyra Deloach and today I will be talking about my Wicked Problems project. And my problem is, how can I get students more comfortable with face-to-face interactions in a digital world? So for starters, what are wicked problems? Wicked problems are described as problems that have many factors and are dynamic. They're problems that have many conditions and there is no formula to solve them. Solutions to them are not right or wrong, but rather good or bad. They often create more problems while attempting to solve them. The question that I came up with that relates to my practice is, how can I get students more comfortable with face-to-face interactions in a digital world? I came to this question because I'm a residence hall manager on a community college campus. In my position, a lot of the things I do are supposed to be preparing students for the future. There are many conflicts in the residence hall that have to do with face-to-face interaction. There's a lot of avoidance and issues, and when conversations do happen face-to-face, there is typically escalation or people retreat and kind of just say whatever they need to get the conversation to end. So this is super relevant in my practice, and it's something that we have things we do for it to help students, but I wanted to see what more I could do, and I was thinking of more of a proactive approach before I did my research. So I created a survey and it had 10 questions. I gathered some information about what their role was. That way I could kind of make sure that it was people who were working with students. I asked questions about communication and how important it was to them as an educator, if they noticed their learners struggling with in-person communication. I tried to see, what do you currently do to assist your students in communicating? How might you think your learners feel about confrontation? How have you used technology to facilitate in-person communication? Opinions on why it's becoming more difficult to communicate. How much the educators who took this survey think that a lack of communication impacts learning, and then what preventative measures they take to help learners or how they help learners embrace discomfort. For my survey, I sent it to 27 people on my college campus. I ended up getting 22 responses. 4 of those responses were from student leaders that work with students. 4 of them were from residence life, so people who work directly in the same kind of work I do. And then 14 others were other, so someone who worked from my college, but it could have been in a different department such as financial aid or career services or first year experience. People who see them kind of that 8 to 5 before we see them the rest of the time they're not in class. I had a small sample as I only had 22 people, so I understand it's hard to kind of get an overall consensus, but it was good to see how people on my campus and around feel about these topics. So for data, how important is communication to you as an educator? 81% said 5 on a scale of not important to very important, and then 4 was the other 18.2%. So this tells me that communication is really important to the people who are educating these students. Have you noticed learners struggling with in-person communication in your practice? This was a little more spread out, but I think it can be hard to notice those signs of students struggling and being proactive in general, as a lot of our work is reactive or we're busy teaching them other things, and it can be hard to notice those signs. So from a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being no, yes being 5, 22% said 5, 36.4% said 4, 31.8% said 3, and then 9.1% said 2. But overall, it looks like the people who took my survey would agree that they've noticed their students struggling with this. On a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you think a lack of communication impacts learning? 1 being not at all, 5 immensely, 59.1% said 5, 36.4% said 4, and 4.5% said 3. And I think that this shows that The educators who took my survey do think that lack of communication impacts learning. So that makes me think other people do see this problem, so I'm glad I'm not the only one, but what can we do to help our students? I did a question that kind of gave people the option to pick or write words that they think their learners might feel about confrontation, and I think this is good. You'll see that 81.8% did pick scary, 77.3% of people picked difficult, 72.7% of people picked hard. The numbers are lower for some of those positive words, but I think this just shows that we do know how our students feel, and we think that they would interpret these things as hard, difficult, and scary. So what can we do to help them? This question was really important to me. What are ways you have assisted learners in embracing discomfort in your practice? In my data, one participant said they aren't doing enough to assist students with discomfort and proactive communication. I found this interesting that there was only one, as this is something that I struggle with. So the other 21 people did give insight to the things that they do. Some examples were creating a safe space, meeting students where they are, sharing their own experiences of what they did when they were in college, giving students space to talk one-on-one, whether that be virtually or in person. That goes back to meeting them where they are. A lot of educators said that they run through scenarios with students, and this is something that I do in my practice as well. And then a couple said encouraging use of resources, which I thought was a really great idea. When I went to research what other people are saying about face-to-face communication, I found this article, The Changing Face of Organizational Communication, School WhatsApp Groups, and this was talking about students, teachers, and parents using WhatsApp, which is like a messaging app, instead of face-to-face communication. It talked about a lot of the positive aspects, but it also had some of those negative aspects. Focusing on this table on page 231, this was research from educators, and you could see the total was 226. And I think that it's really interesting to see the negative aspects. I want to focus on damaging the relationships. 66 people said that unnecessary sharing of any related or unrelated topics spoils the relationships, and then frequent conflicts due to misunderstandings. 34 people said that that was a negative aspect. So it shows me that other people are seeing how digital communication can impact these things versus face-to-face communication. As you'll see, virtual communication, parents were declining face-to-face communication with the teacher. So then this shows me that it's also an issue at home rather than just at school. In conclusion, this can deal with student addiction, which is reducing students' sense of responsibility, which I could see a lot in my practice of students not wanting to communicate face-to-face if their parents aren't making them feel like they can have those conversations. They definitely don't know how when they get to post-high school. Some more research from that same article, face-to-face communication shouldn't be abandoned. This article talked a lot about the pros and the cons, pros being accessibility, that instant gratification, and those things, but some of those negatives that we spoke about, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do either, but face-to-face communication should not be abandoned. In an article, Face-to-Face Communication in Families, the Historical and Contemporary Perspective, this kind of went into more of that communication with parents and made me see that the root starts at home. On page 182, it talked about how daily communication with parents is less than 1 hour a day in the survey that they did. And I think that that just shows that face-to-face communication is not something students are practicing at home, especially post-pandemic. On page 184, it talks about having some fear in communication with the parents is equally perceived by different categories of pupils. Students are having fear in having conversations with their parents about school. So when it comes to time for them to move along and have those face-to-face conversations with classmates, roommates, that kind of thing, they haven't practiced. They don't know how to do it. And that's where a lot of this conflict is, and they're not comfortable in their own families having these conversations, let alone with strangers. Solutions to my wicked problem that I have come to the conclusion of is I think some general things are encouraging productive dialogue in all student relationships. When students talk about their families with you, encouraging them to have productive conversations, even more mundane conversations face to face. I think encouraging the use of resources. In my institution, we have roommate mediations where a third party can come in and be present to help facilitate those and have face-to-face conversations in general instead of texting their roommate or messaging them on Snapchat. I think practicing conversations with students is something that a lot of educators already do, but practice is something that they don't have and that will impact them. Help them feel more comfortable having those face-to-face conversations. As a more specific thing that I could do, I think creating programming where students can practice face-to-face conversations with their peers is really beneficial. Having events like speed friending where they can switch and have even topic cards to help them facilitate those face-to-face conversations could be really helpful, and it's beneficial for them socially, but also it's intentional for practicing face-to-face conversation. Another idea I had was a murder mystery dinner where students have different roles and they have to communicate to each other to kind of solve the puzzle. They could have, like I said, conversation cards, and it could help facilitate that face-to-face, even if it's not serious or hard conversations. That way, when it comes to have those, it might be easier. Where I'm going from here, the biggest thing that comes to mind for me is intentional. That is the word that sticks with me through this. I think that I was focused a lot on being proactive and what I can do to stop things, but I think that I do need to meet students where they are, give them those options for comfort, and help them practice those face-to-face conversations. I think that if I'm intentional with what I want to do, it will impact my residents and students greatly. Here are my references. If you have any additional questions or want to keep the conversation going, you can reach out to me on my blog, and I would love to hear your thoughts.